A couple of weeks ago, we opened up the book of Ecclesiastes, and I spent some time allowing the words of Solomon to bump up against some of our beliefs about fairness, meaning, purpose, and the things that our lives are often consumed by. As one commentator put it, the narrator of Ecclesiastes, referred to as the teacher, believes that life is hebel, temporary and fleeting like smoke or vapour. Humans, he says, try to build meaning and purpose in life, investing in pursuits and things that have no lasting value. But time marches on, we all die, and bad things happen to good people, leaving us with the question, what's the purpose of it all? And how do we make the most of a bad situation when there's no rhyme or reason and your situation in life is very much left up to luck, and even that is transitory? Really encouraging little synopsis of Ecclesiastes there. Now, I purposely didn't close out my message last time with a satisfactory, well, what I thought was a satisfactory conclusion, because I wanted to take a risk and allow the words of Ecclesiastes to give your foundation a little bit of a shake. Now, there were two reasons for that. Number one, I wanted to show our young people that it's okay when you come across stuff in the Bible that seems to run contrary to the narrative that you've been building in your head about God and life. You don't have to scramble to come up with an answer right away when you read something in the Bible or hear something from another source that's challenging because you're fearful it will destroy your faith in God. In fact, if you don't have some questions in your mind regarding God and the Bible, there's a danger that you've bought too deeply into a caricature of God and are running the risk of making God after your own image, rather than you and I having been made in the image of God. And secondly, I wanted to give the words of Solomon an opportunity to butt up against and maybe shift some of your faulty thinking. In the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says in verse 11 of chapter 12, the words of the wise are like cattle prods, painful but helpful. Their collected sayings are like a nail-studded stick with which a shepherd drives the sheep. Now, cattle prods and shepherd sticks are used to change the direction that livestock are headed in. If you've ever worked with sheep, and I haven't, you'll know that they don't always go in the direction you need them to go in. Solomon is saying that we need wisdom to challenge the innate drivers of our lives if we're not to end up in a bad place. Now, no cattleman or shepherd is going to send their livestock into a dangerous dead-end situation, but that doesn't mean that the livestock can't end up there. I've been amazed at times by the ingenuity of sheep to get themselves into dangerous situations. Now, I'm sure that sheep don't wake up in the morning and think to themselves that breaking through the fence and wandering all over the highway on a blind bend is going to help them to flourish and suck the very marrow out of life. But they must, because they do it, just like us humans. We do things in hindsight which add nothing to our lives other than pain, sadness, and disappointment. But at the time we think we're right. Now, before you get on your high horse and think it's just other people and not you who wander across the highway of life oblivious to the semi-trailer that's thundering around the bend towards you, just remember that you and I are just as blind to our life situation as anyone else, and we all need help to see things more clearly. How do I know that? Because every one of us, when reading Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes, find ourselves pushing back against them in one way or another. And that doesn't surprise me at all. Now, for a little bit of background that will help us position the words of Solomon more clearly in our thinking and in his historical context. Solomon lived at a time where the experience and understanding of God by the Israelites was quite different to the one that we have of God today. Solomon lived approximately 1,000 years before Jesus was born. Up until the time of Solomon, Israel had gone from being a family business made up of wandering shepherds to a nation of warriors who had moved into the land around Canaan and defeated all of the inhabitants previously living there, establishing their own identity as a nation in the process. They'd been led down this path by Yahweh, their name for God, who had appeared to their ancestor Abraham approximately 2000 BCE and promised him he would make his descendants into a great nation through which all the nations on the earth would be blessed. Now they had seen Yahweh move on their behalf time and time again from their deliverance out of captivity in Egypt, where they'd been slaves to Pharaoh, through incredible nation-shaking supernatural signs and wonders, through their time in the wilderness, where his presence was with them as a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud during the day, and finally their arrival at the promised land around about 1250 BCE, promised by Yahweh to their ancestors, where their first military victory was brought about by another jaw-dropping miracle that saw the fortified walls of the city of Jericho come tumbling down. Now they had fought in countless battles with surrounding nations as they carved out a place to live, and King David, who was Solomon's father, was known as the warrior king. In fact, when David went to build a temple for Yahweh, he'd been stopped by God because he had too much blood on his hands and was told by Yahweh that his son Solomon would build the temple instead. Now the Israelites as a whole saw God as a powerful sovereign who worked at a national level to secure the future of the fledgling nation of Israel. God was to be feared, respected, and obeyed. He'd given them laws to follow with harsh consequences if they didn't. Now, one of the big differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament is that in the Old Testament we see God dealing with Israel more at a national level, whereas in the New Testament we see God dealing with Israel and the rest of the world at a much more personal level. Now, the Old Testament is all about the kings and judges of Israel and the prophets who spoke to them. In the New Testament, Jesus completely ignored the rulers of Israel and went to the common folk. His closest disciples were fishermen, rabble-rousers, and tax collectors. Now, that doesn't mean that in the Old Testament God wasn't personal. There were definitely glimpses of God's heart toward his people. It was said of Moses that he knew the ways of God, whereas the people of Israel simply knew the acts of God. But on the whole, we see God dealing with Israel as a governmental authority, not as a family member, which helps us to understand the tone of much of Solomon's writing and also the writings of his contemporaries. Now, our current understanding of God has developed over a span of 4,000 years, from Abraham through to the time of Jesus and the writer of the epistles, and then down through church history to our day and age. So when we think of God, we need to understand that when we think of God differently to the people of Solomon's time. For example, we know that there's life after death because Jesus died and came back to life and told us that he was preparing a place for us in his Father's house for when we pass on. At the time of Solomon, whilst they believed that God was eternal, they had no proof that men and women lived beyond the grave. Which is why in Ecclesiastes 3, reading from verse 18, Solomon says, I also thought about the human condition. Had God proves to people that they are like animals? For people and animals share the same fate. Both breathe and both must die. So people have no real advantage over the animals. How meaningless. Both go to the same place. They came from dust and they return to dust. For who can prove that the human spirit goes up and the spirit of animals go down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. That is our lot in life, and no one can bring us back to see what happens after we die. And yet, even in his ignorance, Solomon seems to hold on to the belief that everything we do in life will be judged afterwards, which doesn't kind of make much sense if we cease to exist at our death. Earlier in verse 17, he said, I said to myself, in due season God will judge everyone, both good and bad, for all their deeds. And the final words he said at the end of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12 are similar. He said, God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Now, Solomon was considered the wisest man of his time, not because of his education or family background, which was the best in all the land. After all, he'd been born into the king's household, but because of a gift given to him by God at the dedication of the temple that Solomon built for Yahweh. It's recorded that God appeared to Solomon and offered him anything he wanted as a reward for the magnificent temple that Solomon had built. Now, rather than asking for riches or victory over his enemies, Solomon asked for wisdom to rule over Israel wisely. And God was so impressed with Solomon's choice that he gave Solomon wisdom along with riches and victory over his enemies. Now, we can have confidence in Solomon's wisdom because it was given to him by God. Now, wisdom isn't the same as knowledge. Otherwise, Solomon wouldn't have questioned if humans and animals shared the same fate. He would have known. Wisdom is more about how best to act in any given situation, how to determine what's most important and of highest value. So the questions that Solomon touches on in Ecclesiastes are extremely important ones. The most important one being, what is it that we should pursue in life that is actually meaningful? Now, to answer that question, Solomon first of all dismantles everything that people normally pursue in life that they think will add value. Why does he do that? Because his view is that when we're driven by meaningless purpose, we will end up sad and disappointed, regretting the past and fearing the future. Unfulfilled expectations can cripple us, and regrets can suck the remaining colour out of the time that we have left on planet Earth. Yet if we can see that the things we were pursuing, the events that have happened to us, were actually meaningless, we can have hope that it's not the end of the story. Solomon actually offers us an incredible freedom if we can just see it. What if the opinions of others didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if the words others have said about you in the past didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if your place of birth, your gender, your education, your bank balance didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if your looks or possessions didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if your successes and promotion at work didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if your past failures didn't matter? They were meaningless. What if your bankruptcy or failed business enterprise didn't matter? Because it was meaningless. What if the outcome of the US election didn't matter? It was meaningless. If you believed all of those things were meaningless, then they would cease to have any power over your life. The meaning that you give to things gives them a corresponding level of control over your life. They can then impact on the joy and satisfaction that you feel day by day. Most of us go through life oblivious to the things that we've given permission to dictate the state of our hearts. We allow the clothes we wear, the words other people say about us, the successes that we achieve at work, our past inability to get good grades when at school, to set the very tone of our lives. And Solomon tries to wake us up to the stupidity of that by ripping the Band-Aid off and stating that everything is meaningless, utterly meaningless. And our normal response to that when we read Ecclesiastes is, this guy is an idiot. I'm going to move on to Psalms or some other book in the Bible. Which is why I let us sit with it for 3 weeks. Because I wanted us to really grapple with the words of Solomon. Solomon is saying in Ecclesiastes that just about everything in life is a result of luck and chance, and pinning your hopes on what you achieve is meaningless because anything you gain from it is only temporary at best, and because it's temporary, it's ultimately meaningless and not worth the effort that it takes to pursue it. because even if you manage to pull it off, it could all be taken away from you in a reversal of fortune, which is out of your control. I hope you're not feeling too discouraged at the moment. I just want you to just stick with me. I'm going somewhere with this. You're going to feel happy in a moment, but just stick with me. Because that begs the question, what then should we do? What is meaningful? And that's the question we all need to answer. Your future, well, I should say your present happiness, but also your future happiness depends on it. Now, Solomon's conclusion in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14 was this. At the end of his book, he says this. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey His commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Full stop, the end of the book. It's kind of anticlimactic. You know, you're kind of thinking He's building you right up. He's destroyed the foundations of your life, and now He's going to give you something really profound and really deep, and it's going to make you feel a lot better, and He ends it like that. If most of the things that actually consume our lives and emotions are temporary and dependent on luck, and therefore ultimately meaningless outside of any transitory enjoyment we might get from them from time at the time, then surely only those things that last forever, untouched by luck or chance, are meaningful. In Solomon's mind, the only things that last from generation to generation, untouched by the fickleness of luck and chance, were God and His commandments. Therefore, to fear God and obey His commandments are the only truly meaningful things that you or I can do in life. In fact, when you really think about it, the things that you intuitively, deep down, believe are truly meaningful are the commands of God. Now, it's at this point that I get a bit frustrated with the limitations of the English language, because when I hear the words fear God, the image I get in my mind is someone cowering in front of someone else who has overwhelming physical power that is being used in a destructive way toward them. That's emotionally where I go when I hear those words. But in the Eastern mindset, however, there's a totally different starting point when talking about the fear of God. Now, I've been reading a little bit of Chinese literature recently, translated into English. It's been hilarious. They are so politically incorrect. It's actually quite refreshing, given the culture nowadays. And I keep on coming across this phrase. He didn't put him in his eyes. That didn't mean he picked someone up and stuck him in his eye. But this phrase, over and over again, he didn't put him in his eyes. The phrase basically means he didn't give him the time of day. His opinion didn't matter to him. He didn't consider him when making his decision. There was no respect for the other person's position. And it's this concept that I believe most accurately depicts what it means to fear God. You put him in your eyes. His opinion matters. You give him a position in all of your decisions. He's the first port of call. It's an action of respect and honour that we give to God, shown through our including of Him in the decisions we make in life. That's what the fear of God is. That's what Solomon was talking about when he's talking about the fear of God. To fear God is to give God a place in all of your life's decisions. It's to be conscious of His commandments and to run your actions by them each and every day. When I choose to walk contrary to the commandments of God, I'm demonstrating that I don't fear Him, that I don't respect His opinion. I'm not putting Him in my eyes, as the Chinese authors that I've been reading would say. And His commandments, what are they? Jesus said that all of the commandments of God All of the Old Testament commandments could be summed up into two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. When these two are the source of all our actions, then everything we do in life is meaningful. Whether you're rich or poor, unknown or famous, good at maths, or like me, hopeless, you will live a meaningful life and it will have eternal ramifications. Now, I've spent the last 3 weeks allowing Solomon's words to butt up against the things in my day-to-day life that cause me to get grumpy or anxious. And I've asked myself this question over and over again when I feel that my emotions are being dragged one way or the other. Does it matter? Does it matter? And I've been surprised at the number of times my answer to that question has been, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And then you kind of go, well, why am I getting upset? Why am I getting grumpy? Why am I getting anxious? If it doesn't matter, why am I allowing those feelings to dictate my state of life in that particular moment? You see, it only matters if it puts God in my eyes and is motivated by love. One last thing. If I could have the musos back, that'd be great. One last thing before I close. Just because something doesn't matter doesn't mean I can't enjoy it. Okay? Ice cream doesn't matter, but I love ice cream. Actually, I love chocolate more than ice cream. My birthday is this Thursday. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But just because it doesn't matter doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Solomon says it's okay to get enjoyment from your work as long as you realise it doesn't last. Enjoy the moments of life and focus on what is truly meaningful, and you'll have lived a good life and set yourself up well for the next. Also, I want to say that some of us carry burdens of disappointment from the past. And I don't want to in any way, shape or form give the impression that I am minimizing your experience. But I want you to be free. I want you to start the process of freeing yourself from things that actually don't matter. In the scheme of things, it's meaningless. Why do you feel disappointed over things that you have no control over? You know, there are people, and I'm sure that in here, you're carrying a deep sense of discouragement and disappointment because of actions of others in the past, words that have been spoken over you. It could also be family members who once walked with God and now no longer walking with God, or family members who never walked with God and you really want to see them come to God and you just feel that in your heart. And that is also one of the downsides of loving people. You will feel for them. That just means you're a human, you're alive, actually have a heart. But there are things that have happened in your past, things that people have said, that you have allowed to become extremely powerful. You see, the power that words have aren't in the actual words. They're in the belief that we invest in those words. So if somebody says that you're a failure, that's meaningless. It's meaningless. It doesn't matter. But if you take those words on and you believe them in your heart, you give them power in your life. And I've just found this week, these last 3 weeks, I've just decided, well, I'm preaching this, so I better put it into practice. I just found that little activity, and I've been doing it over and over again. It doesn't listen. There are no quick fixes in life. If it took you 20 years to get to where you are, don't expect, bang, over in 3 seconds it'll be over, all right? But this is what I've been doing. Every time something comes up in my life that reminds me of something that happened in the past, where I just go, oh, I wish that hadn't happened, I've just looked at it and said, that doesn't matter. it's meaningless. And I've just thrown that at that thought that was trying to hijack my day. I said, it doesn't matter. It's meaningless. It doesn't matter. It's meaningless. And that's all I've done. I've just done that. And as I've done that, my thinking has started to change. And the atmosphere of my heart has started to change. And I felt that the power that those words or those situations have had in my life, the disappointments that I've experienced, they've started to just disappear. Started to get less and less and less. Your heart is an incredibly powerful thing. Words are meaningless. But if you believe them, you give them, and you place meaning in those words, you give them power to control your life. So it makes sense, if you're going to believe something, you believe the truth. You believe in things that last for eternity, not just that are transitory. Somebody might have called you an idiot once because they're having a bad day, and they don't even think that of you now. They've completely forgotten that they called you that, but that's just stuck with you for years. So the reason why my life is the way it is because I'm an idiot. And you've just rehearsed that thing and allowed that thing to take root inside your heart. And it's like, who cares what other people say? We're all idiots. No. Who cares what other people say? Because are they God? Do their words last forever? Are they unaffected by chance and luck? And God is the only one who's existed from eternity past and will exist to eternity future. His commands are the only things that are meaningful. And the commands that He gives us, He gave us for our flourishing. So when God says to you, love Him with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself, if you do that, then as a human, you will flourish. It's the very best thing that you could possibly do if you're a human, is to obey the commands of Christ. And when you love others, not only will your life have meaning, but you'll add meaning to theirs. You'll do good in the world. You're aligning yourself with God's commands, and what you do then has eternal ramifications. Loving your kids is always meaningful. Loving your spouse is always meaningful. Loving those around you who are struggling, who are really doing it tough, is always meaningful. Loving God is always meaningful, because God gave us those commands. And He created us in such a way that when we do those things that He has said we should do, that we'll flourish and reach our potential. But hey, listen, there's been a lot of talk about potential, a lot of talk about, reaching your goals and all that sort of stuff in life. Just relax. You've got eternity to reach your potential. All we're trying to do on planet Earth is just set ourselves up well for eternity. Trying to get the foundations in place, trying to get our thinking sorted out. We're kind of like in the sandbox of life at the moment. This is a sandbox. We're playing with toys, all right? Given eternity. So when you kind of go, oh, it's really, really important, I get it right. Okay, just relax. He gave you 2 commandments, didn't make it too difficult. Just focus on those. It'll bring meaning to your life. But along the way, don't allow meaningless things to dictate the state of your heart. Solomon wants you to be free. I actually think that Solomon, the reason why he came to this conclusion was because he was incredibly disappointed with his life. He'd lived it. He'd lived fame. He'd lived riches. He'd been successful. He'd had his 1,000 women, and yet you see in it all, Solomon, he gets it, he goes, it's all meaningless, because all of it's transitory, all of it's temporary, all of it passes. It's just luck, it's just chance. So it's best to focus on things that aren't. God,
you.